"She's not worthy of this family," my father-in-law said at the altar. Then my commander walked in. The first time my father-in-law called me invisible, we were standing in a church filled with 300 people. His voice carried the way only a man's voice carries when he believes every room belongs to him. "Daniel deserves better," he said to my mother-in-law, loud enough that the woman arranging flowers near the altar turned her head. "She's not worthy of this family. She never was." I remember the weight of my dress. The cold brass of the door handle I was gripping behind the pillar. The smell of white roses beginning to wilt in the August heat. And the quiet certainty, settling somewhere deep in my chest, that this was not the worst thing he would do to me. He was right that I wasn't what they expected. But he was wrong about everything else. My name is Mara Calloway, and I was born in a small fishing town in coastal Maine where the fog came in every morning like it owned the land. My father was a shrimper. My mother cleaned vacation homes in the summers and kept us warm with what was left over. We didn't have money, but we had discipline, the kind that lives inside your bones before you ever learn the word for it. I was 12 years old the first time I watched a news segment about the United States Coast Guard. A woman in a sharp blue uniform stood on the deck of a cutter, the Atlantic behind her. Something about the way she stood, like the wind was nothing, changed something permanent in me. By 17, I had already decided. The acceptance letter from the Coast Guard Academy arrived on a Thursday in October. I read it twice in the driveway with my mother standing beside me, still holding a grocery bag she'd forgotten to put down. She cried before I finished the second sentence. My father said nothing for a very long time. Then he pulled me into a hug so fierce I couldn't breathe. "You're going to be someone," he whispered. It was the only time I ever heard his voice break. I graduated 4 years later. The ceremony was held in the late spring, the kind of May morning where the sky looks newly washed. My parents sat in the bleachers with a small American flag my mother had purchased from a gas station the night before. It cost $2. She held it like it was made of glass. I went on to serve 12 years in operations my family couldn't always understand. Narcotics interdictions in the Gulf. Search and rescue in the North Atlantic during storms that swallowed 40-foot waves. A classified assignment that lasted 14 months that I could not, and still cannot, fully describe. What I can say is this: I came back from all of it. And each time I came home someone slightly different, shaped by things that don't fit neatly into conversation. Daniel found me during a brief leave period when I was 31. He was kind in the specific way of someone who had never been tested. Warm, thoughtful, easy to love. I told myself that was enough. I should have paid more attention to his father. Richard Holloway had built 3 car dealerships and a real estate portfolio in 15 years. He spoke the way men who've never been told no tend to speak, with a kind of polished certainty that leaves no room for doubt. The first time we met, he looked at me the way people look at furniture they didn't order. "Daniel mentioned you work for the government," he said, the word government carrying precisely the amount of disdain he intended. "Coast Guard," I said. "Operations Division." He smiled and moved on. Over the years that followed, I learned the language of his contempt. It came in specific forms. Commenting on my posture at the dinner table. Asking Daniel in front of me whether he'd thought about purchasing a bigger home now that his career was doing well, as if mine didn't exist. Introducing me at events as Daniel's wife who works in the military or something. I stayed quiet for 3 years. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That Daniel would eventually say something. That the situation would resolve itself. Then Richard called a family meeting on a Sunday afternoon in March to discuss the future of the Holloway Group. Daniel and I sat across from his parents and his 2 brothers in a conference room at the flagship dealership. Leather chairs. A glass table. The smell of expensive coffee nobody was drinking. Richard placed a folder in the center of the table. "I've been thinking about legacy," he began. "About who this company goes to. Who understands it. Who's committed to this family?" He looked at his 2 brothers, both in business roles for the company. He looked at Daniel. He looked past me like I was a window. I've decided the majority stake will transfer to the 3 boys. Equal shares. The women in this family, of course, will be supported, comfortably, but involvement in the business itself needs to reflect the people who built it. I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the table. Dad, he started, quietly. This isn't a discussion, Richard said. It's a decision. I put down my coffee slowly. Mr. Holloway, I said. With respect, I've contributed to this household and this family for 7 years. I've also spent 12 years protecting coastlines so that businesses like yours can operate. I think I've earned a seat at this table. The room went very still. Richard looked at me for the first time that afternoon. Really looked at me. You protect fish boats, Mara, he said. Don't confuse that with the military. Daniel's brothers looked down. His mother studied her hands. And my husband said nothing. 3 weeks after that meeting, Richard filed legal documents attempting to formally exclude spouses from any inheritance stake in the Holloway group. His attorney had apparently advised him that the cleanest way to accomplish this was to challenge the premise that any spouse had contributed materially to the family business structure. My attorney, a former JAG officer named Patricia Chen who had spent 20 years in military law before entering private practice, read the filing and called me on a Tuesday evening. He's thorough, she said. But he made a mistake. What mistake? He named your income as supplementary, not independent. Which means he's inviting review of your actual financial contributions to the marriage and to his son's professional development. A pause. He doesn't know what you make, does he? I was silent for a moment. No, I said. Daniel handles the household accounts. I never corrected the assumption. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Mara, she said carefully. How long were you assigned to the classified unit? 14 months. And what is your current rank? I told her. Her exhale told me everything. He has no idea who he's filing against. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in November. The courthouse in Hartford was old brick, worn stone steps, the kind of building that had held complicated human situations for a very long time. Richard arrived with 2 attorneys and his 2 sons. He wore a suit the color of authority and moved through the lobby like a man who had already won. His attorney, Gerald Marsh, was experienced and deliberate. He spent the first 20 minutes painting a careful picture, a military spouse, supportive, peripheral, whose career involved routine public safety work rather than the kind of contribution that merited stake in a private family enterprise. I listened without moving. At one point, Marsh held up a document, a description of standard Coast Guard operations pulled, apparently, from a public government website. Your Honor, he said, the plaintiff's wife serves in an admirable capacity. But the claim that this rises to the level of financial or strategic contribution to a private business is simply unsupported. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Elaine Carver, listened carefully. Richard, sitting at the plaintiff's table, allowed himself a small satisfied nod. I caught my father-in-law's eye across the room. He looked comfortable. The way people look when they believe the outcome is already settled. Ms. Calloway, the judge said, your counsel has requested an opportunity to respond. Proceed. Patricia stood. Your Honor, Patricia began, opposing counsel has characterized my client's service record as routine. I'd like to address that characterization directly. She walked to the evidence table and placed a sealed document case in front of the judge. Dark blue. Department of Homeland Security insignia. And across the front, a red authorization stamp I had not seen since the morning a commander slid it across a table to me 14 months into a posting I was never allowed to describe publicly. What is that? Marsh said. Patricia ignored him. Your Honor, the defense requests permission to submit sealed federal documentation regarding Commander Mara Calloway's protected service record. Richard's confident posture shifted. The judge extended her hand. Patricia carried the envelope forward herself. When Judge Carver broke the seal, the sound seemed very loud in a very quiet room. She read the first page. Then the second. Then she removed her reading glasses and looked up at the ceiling for a moment, the specific look of someone recalibrating. "Counsel," she said quietly. "Both of you. Approach." The two attorneys moved to the bench. Their conversation was inaudible. But Marsh's face, when he returned to his table, had changed completely. Richard leaned toward him. "What's in it?" Marsh said nothing. Judge Carver addressed the room. "The court will take a brief recess." She looked directly at me. "Commander Calloway. Please remain available." "Commander." "Not Mrs. Not spouse." "Commander." Daniel's brother, sitting 2 seats from Richard, turned slowly toward his father. "Dad," he said. "What rank did you say she was?" Richard didn't answer. When proceedings resumed, Judge Carver's demeanor had shifted from neutral to something more deliberate. She placed the sealed documents on the bench in front of her and folded her hands. "Mr. Holloway," she said, looking at Richard directly, "I want to be precise with you. The documentation submitted to this court has been verified through federal channels during the recess. Commander Calloway's service record includes operations classified under national security designation. The specific nature of those operations cannot be entered into public record." Marsh began to rise. "Your Honor, if the records are classified, sit down, Counselor." He sat. "The purpose of classification," the judge continued, "is not to suggest those operations didn't occur. It is to protect the people who carried them out and the information they contain. Your client has argued in these proceedings that his daughter-in-law's career constitutes supplementary, peripheral contribution, not worthy of consideration." A pause that felt like a held breath. "This court finds that characterization not only inaccurate, but in direct contradiction to documentation verified at the federal level." Richard's mouth opened slightly. "Furthermore," Patricia rose, "we'd like to submit one additional filing." Your Honor, this is a financial disclosure summary showing Commander Calloway's direct income contributions to the marital household over the course of their marriage. She slid a document forward. I had never told Daniel the exact number. We had separate accounts. I had never corrected his assumption about what I earned. Judge Carver read the summary. Richard's attorney leaned over to look at it. Richard looked over his attorney's shoulder. The number on the page was not small. "Mr. Holloway," the judge said, "your filing suggested your daughter-in-law's contribution to your son's life and to the financial stability of his household was supplementary." She set the document down. "This does not reflect that." Richard looked across the room at me. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw something I had never seen on his face before. Uncertainty. "I'd like to ask," the judge said quietly, "whether the plaintiff wishes to amend any element of his original filing." Richard's attorney whispered something to him. Richard was still staring at me. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Carver said. "I'm speaking to you." He looked at her. Then he looked at his 2 sons. Then he looked at Daniel, who was sitting in the gallery with his hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. Richard stopped. Started again. "I may have been working from incomplete information." The room exhaled. The case was dismissed 6 weeks later. Not partially. Completely. The judge's ruling included language about the importance of accurate disclosure in estate proceedings and noted that characterizing a decorated federal officer's career as peripheral without reviewing available documentation constituted a significant error. I didn't feel triumphant. That surprised me. I had spent 3 years absorbing Richard's contempt. 3 years watching Daniel stay quiet. 3 years telling myself the situation wasn't worth the fight. And when the fight finally came, when the truth finally entered the room and refused to leave, what I felt most clearly was not victory. It was exhaustion. The particular kind that comes from spending years making yourself smaller for someone who would never think you were enough no matter what you did. Daniel and I talked for a long time the night after the ruling. It wasn't an easy conversation. He said he hadn't known how to stand up to his father. I told him that was something we needed to figure out together, or separately. That I had spent my career learning that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is a choice. He heard me. Whether he understood is something only time will answer. Richard called me once, several months later. He asked if we could speak. I listened to what he said. He was not apologetic, exactly. He was something closer to rattled, a man confronting the gap between who he believed himself to be and what the evidence suggested. He said he hadn't realized the nature of my service. That he would have, that things might have been different. I believed he was telling the truth. I also understood that truth arriving late does not undo the years it was absent. I appreciate you calling, I said. And then I told him I needed time. That was 18 months ago. The distance between us remains. But it's a distance I chose, which is different from one that was imposed. My own mother called me the morning after the ruling. She had driven 3 hours to be in the courthouse that day. I hadn't asked her to, hadn't told her where or when. She simply showed up. She sat in the gallery the entire time in a wool coat that had been resewn twice because she refused to replace something that still worked. I watched his face, she said on the phone. When the judge said your rank. When she said your name the right way. A pause. He looked like someone had replaced the floor under his feet. Mom. I'm just saying. I watched it happen. Her voice softened. I've been watching you your whole life, Mara. You were never invisible. Some people just needed better light to see you. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. She was right. Not everyone who fails to see you is choosing blindness. Some people are simply standing in their own shadow. The work, the quiet, lifelong work, is learning to step into the light yourself, and stop waiting for someone else to find the switch. If this story reached something in you today, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone whose approval you once needed? Tell me what changed. And if you stay with us here, if these stories mean something to you, subscribe. Because every week we bring you another journey. And you shouldn't miss what's coming next.